Joined here by the Republican candidate for Governor Walker Stapleton. You have been asked hundreds, if not thousands, of questions over the course of this campaign. Maybe we can cover some new ground here. To the news of the week. So the Anti-Defamation League says that Colorado was one of just 9 states where there were 50 or more anti-Semitic incidents reported last year. You've condemned racism, you've disavowed hate groups. Every respectable politician does that.
Yeah.
Is there something more that's needed out of elected officials to tackle this issue?
Well, I'd love to know if there was something more, because I would be committed to doing it. I'm proud that my running mate, his wife was born in Israel, is Israeli by birth, and I think we need to do more in government and in private life too, about thinking about how do we bring our communities together as Coloradans. And I think Colorado has a chance to really lead. I've been proud to be the treasurer of the state for the last 8 years and to work with Democrats collaboratively, and I think that Colorado really has a spirit of collaboration on big things, and this is a big thing. Our country is really divided. People are really angry. People are angry at one another, and we are seeing the ugliest parts of America, sadly.
You wrote an op-ed for Fox News today in which you suggested that your Democratic opponent, Jared Polis, is a socialist.
Yes.
I mean, he's made hundreds of millions of dollars through entrepreneurship. He seems like he's like the definition of a capitalist, not a socialist.
Well, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that. I think that he was very fortunate, and I don't begrudge his good fortune, to sell a company at the height of the internet bubble. When he sold his business hadn't made any operating income, so it wasn't a sustainable operating business. He sold it with a large growth potential, but the company that bought it actually went bankrupt. So I think that he's a very well-timed businessman, but the idea that he created some sustainable brick-and-mortar business. I just came from touring a McDonald's here in Colorado, and that's not the case.
But so how is he a socialist, though? This is a guy who has built businesses, operated in the private sector.
Because when you're talking about policies, from a carbon tax to a state-run healthcare system to sponsoring the federal version of Bernie Care in the House, he agrees with Bernie Sanders on more positions than John Hickenlooper and I agree on. And John Hickenlooper and I were for the Northern Integrated Supply Project, most important water project in Colorado, along with Windy Gap. He refused to take a position. We're for the Jordan Cove Pipeline Project, along with Senators Gardner and Bennett. He refuses to take a position and doesn't support it. John Hickenlooper joined me when I defeated state-run health care, along with Governor Ritter. He now wants a more expensive, but now he wants a more expensive state-run health care system. So I could go on and on. John Hickenlooper has called his energy plans radical. So I think that he is more closely aligned to Bernie Sanders policy-wise than our sitting governor, John Hickenlooper. And I think Coloradans need to know about that in the last week of this election.
Let me ask you this. What is the #1 thing that voters ask you about all the time that reporters never ask you about?
I think people are really psyched about life in Colorado in general. I think we're seeing a lot of people move here from the East Coast and the West Coast, a lot of young people to start their lives. But mixed in with that, I think, is a lot of apprehension about the future in Colorado. Can I afford to have a family here? Can I afford to continue in a professional capacity here? Because am I going to be able to afford to live here? Is there enough attainable housing for me? Is the economy going to be growing? And so I see a lot of optimism about living in Colorado, mixed with a lot of uneasiness about keeping jobs and the economy roaring in Colorado.
It seems to me that if somebody is truly undecided in your race, then they're probably not very partisan. They're not very ideological, because you and Congressman Polis, pretty stark contrast there. So what would you say to that voter who doesn't care about conservative values, doesn't care about progressive values, and is sitting there and hasn't made a choice? Well,
I'm proud that I've made a decision to be in Colorado as a treasurer of Colorado. I think it's important to know your limitations in life. I never have a desire to run for Congress or Senate. I don't want to go to Washington, D.C. I want to help out right here in Colorado, either through elected office or through philanthropic work. And I'm really proud of my track record working with Democrats on really important things, like starting the first ever land trust investment board for Colorado's land trust, and the money goes to our K-12 education system without raiding another area of the budget or a tax increase. So, passing debt consolidation across our state agencies. All of the stuff that I've worked on in the treasurer's office, having no legislative authority, has been with Democrats, and I have personal friendships to boot. I consider Senator Mike Johnston a good friend. I think you know that my youngest daughter's godmother is Governor Hickenlooper's wife. So I have a personal friendship with Senator Bennett. I have all of their cell phone numbers readily available, and I think that's an important spirit of collaboration that I've learned from being in elected office in Colorado, and I think that's something Coloradans should be looking for in a leader.
You've mentioned your work as treasurer a couple of times. No matter what happens in this race, your second term as treasurer is going to end here at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Are you going to miss that job? I got the sense that you were frustrated by the limitations of the office, the small budget, the small staff, not a whole lot of authority at the state capitol. Are you going to miss that job?
Well, I think it's important to point out that I was the Colorado head of U.S. term limits. I'm in favor of term limits. It's been an incredible honor to serve as treasurer. Have there been frustrations? Absolutely. The pace at which things get done in government is not like the private sector. Before I ever ran for office, I ran a small but publicly traded real estate company. You can make decisions a lot more easily in a private sector career than you can getting consensus in public policy work, but it's important work. And I believe fundamentally that well-intentioned people can do a world of good still. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be running for this office today. And I want to encourage young people having a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old at home. Public service is more maligned than ever by the right and by the left. But really good people are committed to trying to do it. And I think it's noble work. And I would like to be encouraging to people in the future to consider public service.
One of your core arguments against your opponent is that Congressman Polis would raise everybody's taxes dramatically. But of course, in Colorado, voters get to vote on tax increases because of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So if that happens, it means that Coloradans will have said, sure, raise my taxes. What's wrong with that?
Well, I just think that our Taxpayer Bill of Rights is fundamental to our Constitution in Colorado. And I think it puts the responsibility on government to explain to people why they want more money. And I like that responsibility. If you look at Colorado compared to a state like California, highest poverty rate per capita, where there's no checks in place against the growth of government, the budget has expanded markedly over my 8 years as treasurer and to a much larger extent. And I think that it's fundamental to basically make the case in government to why people want to, why the government and the bureaucrats want to spend more of your money. And I think we need to keep that protection in place. And even though you have to go to the ballot through Tabor, there's enterprise zones. Believe me, I could bore your listeners and viewers and you with all sorts of ways to get around the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And one thing I do know is that there's no way to pay for the $90 billion of costs or spending that Congressman Polis has proposed other than to triple our budget, to take it out on individuals through income tax hikes or businesses through regulations and fees. And either one, I think, makes Colorado a really difficult place to live and work in the future.
You were on a conservative radio show the other day, and you were asked if you would suggest to President Trump that he dial back the rhetoric. This was previous to the synagogue bombing, after the mail bombs. And
previous to our debate? No, after our debate.
After the debate, yeah. In which I asked you a question like this and got nowhere, so I'm not going to ask you that question again. I'm going to ask it a different way. Do you think that there is a connection between the way public leaders talk and the way some people act?
Maybe, absolutely. In the same, I think that there's a connection between role models in our society, whether they be athletes, whether they be Kyle Clark, a local news celebrity, or whether they be politicians. And I think all of us have a responsibility to recognize that. Some people, personality-wise, discharge those responsibilities in different ways. But unfortunately, I absolutely think that that's the case. Yes.
I'm going to try one last time.
Or fortunately.
I'm going to try one last time because hope springs eternal with me. You've been really reticent to criticize President Trump's tone. And you said, it's his personality, it's his thing. A lot of Republicans are happy to criticize his tone and still say, but I support the guy on policy. What is it that makes you unwilling to take just the toe in the water step of saying the way he talks about, say, women and minorities, it's not cool with me?
Well, because I am able to separate. I think the policies have benefited Coloradans by and large, and I'm a strong supporter of the president's policies. I think that I support his desire to have more security at our borders. I support the bipartisan bill in the Senate that Senator Gardner and Bennett have come up with, which is if we build the wall, we can give legal recognition and a path towards citizenship to dreamers. I think that's really important to recognize. And I think his economic policies have benefited Colorado. His personality is different from my own. I'm not going to judge his personality because I don't know him well enough to judge it. I can see how his personality has gotten people's dander up, and some people are turned off by it. But I care about the policies and the relationship between the federal government and the state of Colorado if I become Colorado's next governor.
Let's talk about an issue that voters are looking at on their ballot, which is Amendment 74. And you took your time on this. You said, I want want to study this. I want to make sure that I understand this. In simplest version, this would allow property owners to file a claim against government if government action, regulation, or whatever reduces the value of your property. You came out against it.
Yes.
Do you see 74, as some critics do, that this is the oil and gas industry's insurance plan if Proposition 112 passes, which would really restrict oil and gas development? You oppose that, as does Congressman Polis. But do you see 74 as like this nuclear option that the oil and gas industry is holding on to?
Well, it may be. You know, Congressman Polis has supported a 2,000-foot setback, which Governor Hickenlooper and myself begged and pleaded with him to take off the ballot just 3 years ago. And I am concerned about the job-killing consequences of passing Proposition 112. I also respect people's personal property rights, and I think conservation easements, which were a way to compensate, at least from a tax credit standpoint, individuals through easements on their personal property, that was something that sounded pretty good, but it became really misguided when it was practically applied, because people started having, well, I'm going to have an easement across here, and then I'm going to lower my tax. So my fear is that when this actually gets put through the meat grinder, that people take advantage of it in a way that's not helpful. Specifically the trial lawyers who are making plenty of money on construction defects and other litigation. And so
we got 2 minutes. We have 2 questions left. Have you gained or lost respect for Congressman Polis through this race?
I think it's the same. I separate politics from the personal. I've always had what I would say is a decent personal relationship with Congressman Polis, even though we have sharp disagreements policy-wise. And I hope that that's the case with people. I feel like that's been my history with Democrats, Republicans, Independents alike. I try and get along with everybody.
I often say that if I'm not making mistakes, I'm not trying hard enough. When you look back over the course of the campaign, is there a mistake or an error that you would point to? Not something flippant, but something serious where you say, you know what, I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I hadn't said that.
Well, you know, I've always really gotten along with people from all backgrounds, all political affiliations. I'm a pretty fun guy. During my youth, I toured with the Grateful Dead, Kyle, and I was a deadhead, I'll admit it, on your show. And I think that the hard thing is during the political process for your personality to come out. And I really want my personality to come out, and I'm not so sure it has come out in the way that I would most like it as I've been put through the political meat grinder. But hopefully, as governor, I'll have a chance to let my sunny personality shine for all to see. And I think no matter who is elected governor, Coloradans need to put Colorado first, and we need a leader who's going to bring people together, regardless of their political affiliation or their background, and I'm going to do just that.
Walker Stapleton, Republican candidate for governor, making his closing argument to you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate you.
Subscribe to the next YouTube channel and I'll buy you a beer. Am I actually buying them a beer? This could be a very poor idea. We need some terms and conditions. Offer subject to terms and conditions.